Global food prices started to rise in mid-2020 when businesses shut down due to the COVID-19 pandemic, straining supply chains. Farmers dumped out milk and let fruits and vegetables rot due to a lack of available truckers to transport goods to supermarkets, where prices spiked as consumers stockpiled food. A shortage of migrant labor as lockdowns restricted movement impacted crops worldwide. Since then, there have been problems with key crops in many parts of the world. Brazil, the world's top soybean exporter, suffered from severe drought in 2021. China's wheat crop has been among the worst ever this year. Concerns about food security, heightened during the pandemic, have led some countries to hoard staples to ward off future shortages, limiting supplies on the global market. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in late February dramatically worsened the outlook for food prices. The UN Food Agency said prices hit an all-time record in February and again in March. Russia and Ukraine account for nearly a third of global wheat and barley and two-thirds of the world's export of sunflower oil used for cooking. Ukraine is the world's No. 4 corn exporter. The conflict has damaged Ukraine's ports and agricultural infrastructure, and that is likely to limit the country's agricultural production for years. Some buyers are avoiding buying grains from Russia due to Western sanctions. Indonesia, the world's top palm oil producer, announced plans to ban exports of the most widely used vegetable oil on Friday in a shock move that could further inflame surging global food inflation. The halting of shipments of the cooking oil and its raw material, widely used in products ranging from cakes to cosmetics, could raise costs for packaged food producers globally and force governments to choose between using vegetable oils in food or for biofuel. Indonesia accounts for more than half of global palm oil supply. Global prices of crude palm oil, which Indonesia uses for cooking oil, have surged to historic highs this year, amid rising demand and weak output from top producers Indonesia and Malaysia, plus a move by Indonesia to restrict palm oil exports in January that was lifted in March. Other countries have experimented with crop protectionism to try to keep domestic prices down. Argentina, the world's top exporter of processed soy, briefly halted new overseas sales of soy oil and meal in mid-March before hiking the export tax rate on those products to 33% from 31%. The U.S. Department of Agriculture urged international cooperation during the war in Ukraine rather than export bans. Global edible oil markets have been roiled this year by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a move Russia calls a special operation to demilitarize its neighbor, which cut off shipments of sunflower oil from the region. The Black Sea accounts for 76% of world sun oil exports, and commercial shipping from the region has been severely affected since Russian forces entered Ukraine in February. Throughout the pandemic, high vegetable oil prices have helped drive up broader food costs. Cereal prices also hit a record in March, a result of limited shipments of corn and wheat during the Ukraine war. Dairy and meat prices reached a record in April, according to the UN Food Agency, reflecting continually increasing global demand for protein and high prices for animal feed, mainly corn and soybeans. In addition, bird flu in Europe and North America impacted egg and poultry prices. In U.S. inflation data for March, the index for meats, poultry, fish, and eggs increased 14% from a year ago, while beef rose 16%. Freight costs have gone up sharply since the initial months of the pandemic, while shipping and logistical challenges due to lockdowns and safety restrictions from the virus are one reason for high freight rates. Rise in fuel prices has also added to the misery. Since May 2020, the Baltic Dry Index, an indicator of freight prices, has gone up by nearly 400%. Although this data point masks an even sharper spike seen in the second half of last year. Food transportation and energy used in food production are, therefore, much more expensive now than in early 2020. A key reason behind rising food prices is higher fertilizer costs. Fertilizers are an essential ingredient in the food production process, and prices of major fertilizers have been going up sharply. For nitrogen-based fertilizers, the major cause of high prices is the rising price of natural gas, another key component in food production. Average monthly natural gas price, as indicated by the World Bank's Natural Gas Index, went up by nearly 600% between June 2020 and December 2021. The high cost of transportation hasn't helped either, as is evident in trends for the Baltic Dry Index. Export restrictions have also pushed up fertilizer prices. For example, China, which is one of the world's leading exporters of phosphate, put restrictions on its export in 2021 amid tight domestic supplies. As the COVID-19 pandemic intensified in 2020, there were increasing concerns about food availability, leading to grain-producing countries imposing export restrictions. Vietnam, which had a 16% share in global rice exports before the pandemic, held back on granting rice export certificates till the end of April 2020. Kazakhstan suspended exports of several cereal products, oilseeds, and vegetables until June 30, 2020, while Russia placed restrictions on the export of items such as wheat, corn, and mesclun. Consequently, food prices started picking in the second half of 2020, with the prices of cereals and edible oil witnessing strong growth since then. As food prices surge, those at the lower end of the income ladder will be hit the most. Low-income households typically spend a higher share of their income on food items compared to middle and high-income families. Furthermore, low-income households spend more on food types that have risen most in price. For example, staple foods such as cereals and breads constitute a higher share of diet of poor households, all of which have recorded strong growth in prices. Across countries, developing economies typically have a higher share of food in their overall consumer baskets, and hence in their Consumer Price Index, CPI, compared to advanced economies. For example, food and beverages account for 54% of CPI in Ethiopia and 50.7% in Nigeria, compared to just 11.6% in the United Kingdom. Consumers in these countries will likely face a bigger hit on aggregate from rising food inflation than their counterparts in affluent countries. Also, food is a necessity compared to other consumer goods, and a broad price rise across key food segments, as evident from the FAO indices, means that people won't be able to substitute them for cheaper products. The result may be weakened discretionary spending, especially for low-income households. High fuel prices will only make things worse. The combination of higher food costs and low incomes also has the potential to undo some of the global gains in poverty alleviation achieved over the past 2 decades. According to the World Bank, the pandemic, in tandem with high inflation and geopolitical tensions, will likely lead to an additional 75 million to 95 million poor people in 2022 compared to pre-pandemic forecasts. And according to the annual Global Hunger Index, an absence of food supplies could lead to an increase in malnutrition and hunger in nearly 60 countries, an increase from 47 countries before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Unfortunately, rising food prices comes at a time when economies have just emerged bruised from 2 years of a pandemic. During this period, as economic activity faltered, many governments stepped up to support consumers and businesses. Consequently, debt and deficit levels have risen on average across the globe. For developing nations, however, the deterioration in the fiscal math also comes at a time when debt servicing costs are set to increase as the world's major central banks focus on monetary policy tightening. Among the world's low-income economies, 60% are estimated to be either in debt distress or at a high risk of it, while the financial burden of servicing past debt has gone up to its highest level in 30 years in middle-income countries. Such fiscal stress will restrict the ability of these countries to provide relief to their people through subsidies and transfers, and currency weakness for some may raise the burden of purchasing food in the global market, where most commodities are priced in dollars. That may not augur well for social and economic stability. Isolated incidents of protests, driven by soaring food and fuel prices, and the pandemic's economic fallout, have already been reported from various parts of the world. Countries in North Africa and Asia that primarily depend on Russia and Ukraine for key food requirements may fare far worse if the conflict continues for long. One of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations is to end world hunger by 2030. However, first the pandemic and then the conflict in Ukraine may likely end up reversing years of progress in reducing global hunger. The upheaval in global food markets since 2020 also serves as a warning that the world must be better prepared for global disruptions in the future, such as climate change. Recent research reveals that over half of all shocks to crop production systems globally result from extreme weather events, with droughts causing the highest damage. Changing precipitation patterns and increasing temperatures have also put the food system under pressure. According to FAO estimates, global mean yields of maize have declined by 3.8% and wheat by 2.5% between 1980 to 2008 due to climate change. Failure to learn lessons from the last 2 years with regard to preparing for other challenges may therefore mean that the world gets hungrier and even more unequal. That will not only be an economic setback, but also a global tragedy.